We're going to talk to Mark, who's calling in from Pennsylvania. Mark, you're live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hey, I find that the topic I wanted to bring up sort of dovetails with the gentleman that came before me. And I am an atheist. And without a God, because I believe in there's no magic or supernatural beings, there's no afterlife. Would many people, if they got to take a peek at like what's headed their way, might opt out and say, you know what, with all the sunsets and the smells of flowers and good friendships, and I will admit that this is definitely tinged by the fact that I'm watching my mom pass away from dementia over the course of the last year in a nursing home, that it's like, if this is how it ends, we don't fall asleep and die, that maybe this isn't worth it. That if there is, as I believe, I've seen no evidence of an afterlife, that it's like, would a lot of people say, you know what, I'll forgo the good days because there's just so many bad days? Do you think a lot of people might opt out of this existence?
What an interesting question, Mark. I don't think a lot of people would. I certainly think some people would. I think just because, there's 7 billion people on Earth right now, let alone everybody that's ever existed in human history, or even up to the point where we're calling people humans and not something else. I think this thought has probably crossed some people's minds. And I think some people would say yes to that, which is morbid, but I think it's just simply true. Now, of course,
the fear that will not be named didn't help.
Yeah. Sure. It's a catch-22, isn't it, Mark? It's a catch-22 because it's a catch-22 because we have to be alive, and we have to have experiences, and we have to have judgments and opinions in order to come to a decision on whether or not it would be worth it. And you can't have that without being alive, right? So that's the problem with, at least for us who. So I'll let you talk in just a second, Mark. But as us, for those of us who are atheists, those of us who more or less believe in like a material reality. Like, I have to believe that my experiences are the culmination of that material reality. In other words, I am what I am, like, completely made up of physically. And so there's no soul like that was here before me that could have like made a decision like that. So it kind of doesn't even matter, right? Because this is just a decision that nobody can ever really make for themselves before they're alive. Now, whether or not somebody wants to end their life while they are alive is a philosophically interesting question as well. I, for one, happen to be in support of those who are at the end of their life and wish it to be make that decision for themselves as autonomously and as rationally as possible, should be able to do that. Now, of course, that involves very specific circumstances, and it's an interesting history to read about how countries have handled it. For some countries, you have to go through panels where you have to get checked off. You have to get the approval of a psychologist. For some countries, you can't do it at all. There's no access to it. So how different countries have handled this issue is from like a legal perspective and just quite simply a moral perspective is really, really interesting. Of course, I'll never say that I have all the answers, but I do think there might be circumstances in which that might be appropriate. But Richard, what do you think?
I first of all, I sympathize with you, Mark. I really do, because I watched my dad die of cancer. Yeah. And he went from being a 60-year-old who looked like a 50-year-old to a 60-year-old who looked like an 80-year-old within the space of a couple of months. Yeah. And it was in a lot of pain before he died, a lot of pain. And, so I do sympathize. I've been through it myself. And it is difficult, and it does make you think about mortality and things like that. But I think, speaking to the wider question that you asked, would people, if they knew the future, elect to leave this life? There are a lot of people in this world a lot of people in this world who are in situations that are no fault of their own, where they are suffering every day. Some of them are born into it. Some of them trafficked into it. Some of them, people have real suffering and pain and hardship every single day of their life. And I'm sure a lot of them would elect to, without even seeing the future, just from the present circumstances, elect to give up if they had that choice.
Yeah.
It's a difficult question. It's an interesting question. As far as end of life care goes, I'd pretty much agree with what Dan said. People should be allowed to make that decision at the end of their life. But yeah, it's a wide subject. It's an interesting subject, and when you're faced with mortality, of course, this is when we think about it.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on that, Mark?
Well, I definitely agree with you. I mean, with 7 billion people on the face of the earth and so many different cultures, there are multiple ways that people deal with this. And I agree. This is not a shot at you, Dan, but you're 25 or 26. I don't wish anything but the best for you in life. But you're slowly going to start having experiences that, like, wow, this is awful. And at 58, losing friends suddenly. I go to the doctor. He's like, your blood pressure's fine. This is fine. That's fine. And yet I'm still losing friends. And that until you get to a certain point in life, you don't realize, and maybe it's a good thing because I am living my best life ever. But I am still so well aware that, gosh, watching my mother pass away in front of me, and this is my destiny in most likelihood, is a daunting kind of contemplation, if that makes any kind of sense.
I think
it is
does.
a daunting contemplation, and it's a contemplation, Mark, that has led a lot of people to religion. People are scared of death.
Yeah.
People fear it. People are scared of the unknown. People like me who aren't necessarily scared. I'm not bothered about dying as such, or death. I'm not bothered about death. I'm very concerned about the way in which I exit life.
Yeah,
I don't want to go in the same way that my father went. Suffering months of pain. Like everybody, I want to go to sleep surrounded by my loved ones, and that's it. But we have no control over that, unfortunately. And it's so hard to when you as you said, you get into the age where you're realizing things, and it's something I've thought about for a lot of time, because I've been involved with speaking to religious people for a lot of time, and I've contemplated death and dying. And it's very difficult when you to face that realization, and it is a scary prospect. And nobody can blame you for being scared about that. It's not irrational to be scared about that. When you're faced with mortality, it's perfectly reasonable to be scared about it and unsure about it. You have nothing but sympathy for you.
Yeah. Yeah. People.
That because.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's like you're 25, then you're 30, then you're 33, and it just feels like it's going to go on forever. And then all of a sudden you have this moment of clarity, and often it is triggered by the death of, your parents, if you're lucky enough to still, be in touch and have family and such. And then you watch that it's just like, you don't just die one day. You go through this, it tears the dignity from you, the way that we die. And gosh, I don't regret. I see no evidence of, an afterlife or a God. And just sometimes I wonder, would I have said, no, thank you? And how that reflects on me, if that makes any kind of sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. As human beings, I think it's natural for us to develop narratives about our lives that make sense in order for us to have meaning, right? So like religious stories give us this narrative that say, I truly believe when I was a Christian that God had given me the chance to fulfill a purpose, a God-given purpose to do the act of God. And when I stopped being a Christian, of course, I completely lost that. And that was a really hard thing for me to do. I thought God was going to give me a career. God was going to give me a wife. God was going to give me like this life, that he would treat me well as long as I followed his wants, his desires, as capricious as they were. As long as I followed them, I would be a good Christian boy, then that would come to me. And unfortunately, the reality of that seems to be suspect. It doesn't seem like that narrative holds weight when we look at it with any kind of scrutiny. So instead, what do I have to do? I have to find narratives that make sense to me, because it's hard for human beings to fully live out a life of nihilism. Like even Friedrich Nietzsche, who is often attributed to like establishing a philosophy of nihilism, had like value narratives that made sense to him as far as like what a superior human being should be like. They were awful, and I don't recommend anybody follow them, but at least he had a narrative that made sense and a goal, like a teleology to follow. For myself, it's hosting the show. Honestly, this show has given me so much life and so much purpose to doing stuff with the ACA, and of course I do lots of other things outside of this. This is one of several things I do, but like that's something that sustains me and helps me. And I hope if one day I do succumb to this story that you tell me about, Mark, about what my life is going to be, that I hope that maybe somebody could research my condition, whatever it is, and it can help people have less suffering at the end of their life, or maybe come to some sort of cure for something. There's a lot that we don't know about dementia. I don't know if it's something that can be cured, but it can be something that could probably be helped. So anyway, my encouragement, I guess, is to hopefully transform the things that you see in your life and figure out a narrative that makes the most sense for you. Not one that's irrational, not one that tells you lies, that says, oh, you're going to go to heaven after this, but one that can make you find a sense of comfort and peace in what you're doing. Because I think every human being deserves that, at least, in order for us to, live a life that we can work with, that makes sense to us, right? Anyway, I know I'm talking a lot of things here, Mark. I hope all that's been helpful for you.
No, I won't take up any more of your time, but your words reek of compassion, and
Mark,
you are to be lauded for it. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mark.
Before you go, Mark, I don't know if you can see the live chat. But if you can't see the live chat, I implore you to look back on the show afterwards and read the live chat, because there are links for secular support being put in there. And it may be worth having a look at those.
Oh, thank you. I will.
Yes, please do.
Have a good night, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mark. Have a great rest of your night. And that goes, of course, to anybody who is having contemplations of shedding this mortal coil. I mean, let's put it bluntly, right? Like, chances are, like, you don't have to feel that way. Chances are there are solutions to the problems that you might face. They might not be immediate. They might have to take time, and it might take a journey between friends and maybe a therapist and maybe whoever else is willing to help you get there. But there's a lot of people who have been through a lot of rough stuff in this community who would be happy to give you perspective and would be happy to show you some of those resources. Please check that out in the live chat. And you know what? Maybe, crew, if we could, maybe put some stuff in the description for this episode as well. It would be fantastic for that. But anyway, Richard, did you have anything else on that before we moved on?
Yeah, so it's a difficult period when you're going through, and we are social creatures. Mm-hmm. And it's good to have a support network, whether that's whatever that network is, whether it's family, friends, like you said, around you. We are social creatures, and we take comfort from each other.
Yes, definitely. You don't have to be alone, especially not now, where we have like the internet, where there's lots of cool people. There's a lot of shitty people. Don't get me wrong, but there's some cool people on there too. So anyway,